finish. Bear with me if things seem a little disorganized. I'm trying to put 100 pages of work into an hour, and that's not the easiest thing. But I have a fancy phrase. If I don't know something, I'm just going to say, that is beyond the scope of my thesis. That seems foolproof, right?
But can't you get AI to fill it in?
Should have those glasses, right? That someone can ask me and AI will tell me the answer right there. Well, first, here, I'll pass around. Print out. Right there, you know, got a good turnout. Oh, I need one print out. It would seem important as we're deep diving into ritual and the mechanics around ritual. To define what ritual is. And so let's just throw some ideas out there. When you think of ritual, what are the words that come to mind?
Doing something over and over again.
Repetitive, right? Handwriting is awful, but
Tradition, that's what I thought, it's a
tradition,
tradition.
right? It's connected to something before us.
Right.
I was gonna say history.
History, yeah. Let's do slash.
Transition.
Transition, liminality. Commemoration.
Commemoration.
So to mark a moment, essentially, to add value and emotion. What's the word you use? Commemoration.
Memory and tradition put together.
Never thought about
The code.
All right, yeah.
It's a tool that allows you to connect to the transcendent.
Tool to connect to the divine.
We agree.
Hmm?
We agree with the baby.
Baby. Oh, the
Yeah.
baby. Yeah, we have all ages here. We have Summer, who's 2 months old as of 2 days ago, right? Yeah. Who knows where we go?
Training, habituation.
Habituation training. These are perfect words to get us into the thesis.
Comforting.
Yeah, it's comforting. Right, so we get, yeah.
Commonality, something we all have together to do at the same time.
There's a communal
Connectedness.
connectedness.
Necessary.
Oof. Necessary.
Big claim, big claim.
You're using my words.
That's
I'm
a strong
defeated.
word.
I think after today, you'll feel it is somewhat necessary. Any other? Yeah, take one more. Oh, all right, so we have repetitive.
When you say ritual, I think of Baruch Atah Adonai, because it's like the opening, it's like in my brain, like
Yeah,
I hear ritual, that's what I think. You know?
sometimes we shorthand that, and my
Yeah.
handwriting's bad as BAA, so
Yeah.
Baruch Atah Adonai.
Nice.
Okay, so we have a pretty good understanding of ritual here. We have it connected to the past. There's a level of repetitive to it that's big. There's moments for transition, comforting, habituation, connectedness. The communal aspect is huge, and we're going to dive into all of them. And the big one, necessary. And I love that. It fits exactly into the thesis of what I'm working with. Of really, the premise is that rituals are not some relic of the past. They are advanced technology of transformation that are essential to us as people, as humans, and even beyond humans. We have examples of ritual being in birds and bees and apes and primates, that these things are not just necessary for us, but that these are amazing tools that we should be using for transformation. And the basis of the thesis is we can look at these, we can look at rituals and how they affect our body, and it result And we can use ritual in a way for more pro-social, more ethical, more empathetic behaviors in a way to boost communal cohesion, okay? And so the main thing, the premise that I'm speaking to is called emotional scaffolding. Okay, and so we used up a lot of the board here. See, let's just turn it around.
I don't know if we have a lawyer's
Yeah.
Emotional scaffolding. So with a ritual, we have first the action. We have then how the action affects our biological makeup, how it affects our nervous system, how our movements, the intention, how it affects our thoughts. So it goes into the biological. Next, that affects our nervous system. We have all of these different ways of how the outside world impacts how our nervous system is. When we're running, when we hear something, our heart starts to race, our stomach starts to churn. This biological response becomes a neurological response. Let's. Yes. Can everybody see this? Am I right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Fair enough.
Clayton, I would argue that there's pre-action, there's some intention or kavanah before the action takes place.
That's a big one. And we're gonna see that the more we have intention and value and the more buy-in each of us have into the ritual actually creates a deeper encoding of the biological, the neurological, and then after the neurological, we know neurology affects our emotion, our emotional demeanor towards others, our emotional demeanor towards ourselves. If we're anxious, our emotional makeup is very different than if we are calm, seated, and meditating, right? So it goes from the neurological to our emotional. I wish we had an eraser.
I think
She doesn't
Barbara's
get
got
one.
one.
Okay, and then our emotional demeanor over time in different instances affects how we show up in community in relation to others. And so we see this chain of how it starts with the action, it makes our way through the biological, the neurological, the emotional, and then showing up for the community. This is how we can see how ritual becomes communal cohesion, just in the simplest term. Yeah.
Does it entail instinct? Like
Yeah.
you said that animals have these rituals, so isn't that instinctual?
That's perfect to get us into the next quote of there is something innate in humanity of why we do ritual. And this essential question of the thesis is, why is it innate in humanity? Why have we felt the need to do this over time? And how it is working to be successful for that adaptive response. Yeah, Rabbi Sasson.
Sorry to add to the instinct thing. I once heard an interview with a biologist who said most things we think are instincts from animals are actually learned from their parents. And that we try to say it's instinct to make us as humans as better than them because we're learning and they just have these knowing, just do things, but actually most mammals learn also from their parents.
Okay.
And birds too.
With that is the essential premise of the thesis right here. We know ritual can affect with the action our biological, neurological, emotional, and then we see a response through all different types of studies that through specific rituals we can create better engagement, more social cohesion, more empathetic behaviors, more care for others. But on that innate thing, I just want to take a second because there's a quote that I want to get to right at the very first bullet point of our printout. So would someone volunteer to read that for us?
Do you want to share it online?
My grandma.
For your grandma?
Yeah, my grandma, I assume grandpa also tuning in.
Okay, I love that.
So yeah, we're at A right now on the sheet. Yeah, would you mind reading for us?
Performance of rituals is as characteristic of human beings as speaking language and living in social groups. The modern attempt to downplay ritual is very unusual in the history of the world.
Right. there are two huge pieces here. That ritual goes back to the earliest human civilizations, the earliest actions of humanity, that we have proof of ritual existing and ritual formulation happening. And that begs us the question, why? In the second part of this quote says the modern attempt to downplay ritual is very unusual in history. What comes up for you with that ending?
What
It's second part.
what modern attempt to downplay, when you say
Right.
modern attempt to downplay ritual, like,
Like when you see Protestants who say what the Catholics did is just made up, the rosary or all the different rituals, or especially what the Jews do. We don't need that because we've transcended it, right? That's a downplay, or modern Protestants downplay
Okay.
ritual, even though they have their own
Or
rituals.
some of you say.
The second part seems to talk of the hubris of modern science, the idea that modern science doesn't need ritual, any of that fancy dark ages stuff, all that wishy-washy magic, and it's just done away with it.
Religious ritual has no need anymore.
Yeah.
Science can prove everything. We've gone into a very rationalist world that we need to prove A equals B or A then B equals C. If we can't explain that logical chain of thinking, our world has sort of gone away from that. Since Enlightenment, it's become much more rationalist thinking. Yeah.
This might be off topic, but just like our children doing what we did, like our daughter doesn't celebrate the holiday with her family the way we did.
Yeah, exactly. Even people are moving away from ritual, and we'll get to it, but there's this massive trend of people moving away from religious affiliation as a whole. So those are all things to keep in mind. Kim, did you
I
have
was gonna
something?
say, not just the Protestants, but Reform movement.
Right.
Yeah.
In part of the same milieu,
Our
yeah.
same idea.
Yeah.
Wondering, maybe we'll get to this, what,
Oh. Okay.
I think there's also like a physical aspect to it though, people literally moving away, like in America in post-World War II, like the way that our neighborhoods are built, like with the move into suburban neighborhoods, like you're literally just not in a community the same way that you were. And so there are physical barriers to performing ritual the same way that maybe ancestors did.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are these communal trends with the way our cities and suburbs are created, but also technology, right? I mean, we're so quick to FaceTime other people. So many people in the midst of COVID were doing Zoom to attend services, and even after, now that it was safe to go back, people still prefer to attend Zoom services over being in person. And so the entire culture of showing up in community and ritual has changed. And that begs the question of what are we losing when we lose the power of ritual? We have something that goes back to the earliest humans that was essential to them. Why is it not essential now? And the fact that it's not essential now, what is being sacrificed in our communities and on the individual level?
I think communities are being sacrificed. I think the fact that we don't have a lot of these rituals as much is making people aren't as close knit and.
A sense of belongingness,
Yeah,
you know,
Sense of belonging.
together.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is one of the most urgent times for belonging. We're in this epidemic of loneliness. And we have our Vivek Murthy, his role in the government was
Surgeon
the
General.
Surgeon General. He compared loneliness, chronic loneliness, to smoking 16 cigarettes a day. So there is such a physical impact, but the mental, emotional, spiritual impact on the loneliness we're feeling widely throughout America is impacting hugely. And so we have to think, how can we create more community, and how losing ritual is hurting our ability to create community that's actually helping the loneliness
I think
epidemic
that's a lot
stay
of-
firmly in place.
I think that's a lot of what led, and it's funny, I read an article recently from someone who is no longer a MAGA, but I think that's a lot of why MAGA came about, is people were lonely, and so they all jumped into this idea of we're a group, we're doing something together, we're doing the same thing, and I think.
Rally is the same thing as I shouldn't say the same thing. A rally is a church service.
Right, so, and I think that's people are looking for that community, so that's why they're.
And that brings up a good point. I'll take your question right after that. It's just a great transitional moment of ritual does not necessarily have to be good too. We can see the ability to affect engagement with community in Nazi Germany. I mean, Nazis were huge about strategic rituals to create communal cohesion, but encoded it in the opposite of pro-social, an anti-social way that hurt social communal cohesion and the way people show up for other people, humanity as a whole. And so if we can recognize the power of the reverse, we definitely can recognize the power of it for good, to be benevolent for humanity. The question we got into a little bit was, why now? Why is this so important? This idea of loneliness came up, but also religious affiliation. It's dropped 8 or 9% over the last decade, but spiritual but not religious, that category of people in surveys, that people are saying, I still crave spirituality, I am a spiritual person, but I am not religious, has grown 8 or 9% in the last decade. So that spiritual craving and yearning hasn't gone away. It's just looking in a different direction. And that begs us the question of, what about rituals? How can we adapt rituals to make up for that, to resonate with people that are spiritual but not religious? There's one philosopher that called this religious boredom, or ritual boredom is the term. And it's the fact that rituals either aren't resonant with people anymore, or the rituals we are creating are too outdated to speak to people. And so we have to take in this idea of ritual boredom. And the only way to do that is really diving into how these rituals are working, why they are working, and we can use those mechanics, those learnings, in order to polish better rituals to meet modern day needs of spirituality, even if someone is not religious technically. Are we following along there? That's a lot of frontal information there, but that is the charge.
So we need to have good rituals though, not, so if we're gonna come back and try to get some good rituals, we need to find out good ones as opposed to ones that take you in the other direction.
Right. And
More meaningful too.
we need to encode rituals that are not only resonant with people, but that are encoding and using mechanics to make more social cohesion, to make more community, to make people more empathetic, giving, generous people in society, to make up for this fragmentation that we're feeling widely across the world, American culture as a whole. That is the urgency right there. Yeah.
Like, I feel like, you know, a chuppah in a Jewish wedding, I feel like non-Jews now, like everyone wants a chuppah. They want that ritual. They don't even maybe know what it is, but it's a pretty thing. They have some kind of flowers or some kind of covering. They want the ritual, but they don't even know
What it
that
means.
Or Jews for a long time, I see it less now, wanted the non-Jewish ritual of, I now pronounce you, or fathers walking the bride down the aisle or something like that, because Jews are influenced by, wedding rituals of Protestants,
Same with choirs, same idea.
Yeah.
Jewish choirs were influenced by big German churches having gorgeous choirs, and the Jews were like, wait, we can sing too.
Yeah, we have
Organs and-
pianos and so it's all
Pianos and
Protestant
organs.
churches.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings up a big point that rituals are being created. We are in a culture where
Right.
ritual creation has happened for thousands and thousands of years, and we can track our history and see where these ritual additions were made. There is something really scary about recognizing our rituals did not come from Sinai, that it is not coming from the divine pouring down these things and saying, these are sacred acts, you need to do them. But there's also some power and agency in recognizing rituals were created by humans and from an innate need in humans for that social framework. And that we can make the changes ourselves. Rituals have naturally come from an experimentation process of, we saw what rituals worked, we're going to keep that. This part of the ritual did not work, so we're going to remove that or change this aspect. We are still in the process of ritual correction and formulating, and we should not take away our own agency of our role in polishing rituals, because that's how they came to be. Yeah.
Do you think America, without having a established church, allows for more innovation in this area than maybe countries that do have an established church?
That's a good question. I imagine so, that there is a freedom, yeah, that's outside the scope, but I think it's a good question. We have more freedom, especially in Judaism, where there isn't the archdiocese looking over, there's no authority in Jewish rituals, but in America as a whole, that there is more separation of church and state.
Maybe a lot of
That's a good question.
evangelical, charismatic.
When did Jews move away from sacrifices?
When the
Talk
temple-
about rituals.
When the temple was.
When the second temple was destroyed. But that's a good point. We were forced to make changes, and ritual changes are a response to
Also.
historical
Abraham-
changes too.
Abraham tried to, was asked to kill his son and they substituted an animal.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's all to make that this is not a luxury. This is a survival. This is a technology for survival, for healing, connection, moral orientation in a world that has so much fragmentation, loneliness, ecological instability. We're obsessed with the individual, and the claim of the thesis is we need more ritual, well-encoded rituals to respond to the needs of the time. Why right now is this so important to connect neurology, emotion science? Because it has only become available in recent years. It was only in the 1900s with William James, Sigmund Freud, Emil Durkheim, that people were saying we can study consciousness. We can observe how consciousness change. We can look at the unconscious behavior. But it wasn't until 1990s that we have technology more in vitro or in vivo, maybe we can see what's going on the inside of us with CAT scans, PET scans, fMRI, EEGs. We now know ways and have the technology to measure activity and levels in our brain that we haven't been able to do before. This is really a recent thing that's become available to us, and I think these shifts in technology, the ability to do so, means we should be using these skills to help with our rituals, religious activity. And just to recognize that in the 1990s, that decade was titled the decade of the brain, because there was such development and technology around the brain. And that's just 1990. This is so recent. I'd like us to move to quote 2, quote B on the thesis discussion printout. Would someone mind reading that one?
What truly matters isn't the exact text of the prayers, but the togetherness, the sensitivity, and the actions inherent in the ritual.
So how do we understand this quote here? Yeah.
There's a lot of work going on here, but the first part of the sentence is him evacuating the position of truth.
Right.
Let me unpack that. The veracity, the truth, the divine origin of the ritual is not what matters here.
Mhm.
It's how we relate to it.
It's how we relate to it, right? That's the sensitivity right there, is how we relate, how much we buy into a ritual. It's not about truth. It's not necessarily about what we are saying. It's the mechanics. It's the choreography of it. It's showing up in community. That's so impactful. They have all these religious studies, statistics about how impactful religion is, about how it lowers our blood pressure, makes us less existentially anxious. But none of that matters just being affiliated with the religion. It's about if you are participating in the rituals, if you are showing up. Yeah.
Sometimes I think, as someone who loves to pray and rituals, sometimes I think translating the Siddur is the worst thing that Jews did, because then once people didn't understand Hebrew anymore, of course, and then translating it made them know what the prayers say, and then they didn't want to do them. Right?
I was gonna say, it's the exact example is that is praying when we do our prayers, like, I don't know exactly what a prayer, because I can read Hebrew, but I don't understand it. So.
But I would say
But we
that
all
doesn't
do
matter.
I know, but it doesn't matter, because to me, just singing like Legato D and
Yeah.
the songs that we all know, and
Right.
the tunes we know, brings us all together. It's not what I'm saying, it's.
And whether we know it or not, it's interacting with the biological and neurological and how we are showing up in community, whether we know what the words are saying or not.
Okay.
It's not irrelevant, but it's less relevant than just showing up and being a part of the ritual. Yeah.
The rituals are like a magnet that bring people in. If they didn't have the rituals, then they'd say, well, I can be a good Jew to stay home.
Yeah.
And that makes them affiliate And being affiliated means that the next generation hopefully stays in line instead of drifting off as it's happening now.
And it's more than just even bringing people together into a shared room. It's the ritual is actually impacting the amount of connectedness in the room. I could bring everybody in the room and we could do nothing. And yes, there would be a sense of community created by that, but we'll look at some of the studies that bringing people in, even if it's an arbitrary ritual about clapping 3 times or putting a bead to your forehead, there is much more social cohesion, interconnectedness, there's empathy, there's more willing to sacrifice time and effort if you add the ritual aspect to it. So it's that and some. Thank you.
It's a quick question. Is it possible that ritual could dip into idolatry?
I think that's beyond the scope.
Nice first century Christian critique of Judaism there.
Yeah. Totally.
Barbara, did you have a question?
You know, from a conservative background for the most part, and being in a reform background, one of the things I note that's hard for me, I'll just say, is that there's a lot less ritual that we're engaged in when we're in services in a reform community. I mean, we're listening a lot, and some people are singing, but I'm used to bowing and bending, doing all these different things, putting on a tallit, doing this, doing that. And I'm wondering what the impact of that is, and if we have more people coming into the reform movement for lots of good reasons, but what does that lack of ritual, at least as I understand it, do to us as a community? And, we also, as a community, are the largest givers to Chabad, so, which I think is like an interesting dynamic that we have less ritual, but we give a lot of our money to the people who have a lot of ritual.
Right, and but like sometimes Chabadniks are, you meet a Chabadnik on the street and it's just do the ritual, like that's what they want, right? It's they know, and you see the guy that looks like ritual, if you will, they know that's a way to draw people in, right?
I think it's a good question. I want to present just a question that got brought up in the midst of this discussion with each other. Was Rabbi Satz discussed how translation might have been an issue to bring in the Siddur. And as we're unpacking the mechanics of ritual and the impact it has on our body, is that demystifying ritual? Are we doing something wrong by unpacking the role of ritual, or is it actually deepening the mystery of ritual itself?
Very postmodern question.
Is anybody hesitant to unpack this because they see our rituals as sacred and we should keep the mystical element?
In there's 2 parts to me. So I come usually to Rabbi on Saturday morning, and that's very intellectual and it's rational, and I appreciate the unpacking. But if I wanted to get a certain sense of otherworldliness or transcendent, I need to sort of suspend my rational self to kind of partake in that or that happen for me. So to me, I prefer Hebrew, to be honest with you, for that reason, and service.
I think it's very fair.
I think I guess the Hebrew is more like mystical and people get more out of just listening to it. But when, kids today hear, young people hear like about goats or whatever, or cubits or what, I don't know, it means less to them as when Chabad comes to you and says, let's, like a shared experience, like let's make challah together, or let's, do something, a shared experience that is more meaningful. You get more out of it than listening to the words that don't relate to you.
And that's also something that's been coming up in these studies, is the amount of presence, how much you are actually buying into the ritual itself also impacts the impact.
I don't know if this is important, but I think another thing that doesn't help me is I like the mystical. I think the mystical is a feeling that you can't translate. However, and probably a feeling coming from a mystic, from a mystical, person. I think that understanding has to be, you have to understand well ritual, Because sometimes when I'm appreciating something in synagogue, I want to think about it more and it goes so fast, the words. Well, I think you have to understand the ritual,
I think there's an element of that.
education.
And I would argue that that mystical consciousness is hugely impactful. It changes people's lives. One instance of mystical consciousness, people will quote and refer to 2 decades later because that mystical consciousness is so impactful. But if we can unpack using these strategies to better understand, to go deeper into it, to create more mystical consciousness, is that not better for society
Oh,
than just having mystical consciousness coming during spontaneous moments? If we are more informed, is that not better than
that's what I'm
just,
saying.
yeah, I am agreeing with you.
I think it depends also on what you're doing. It's interesting. One of my concerns I had with joining a Reformed temple, because I came from conservative as well, is in the conservative temple that I belong to, everybody sang and everybody participated in it. They may not have even known what it translated to, but they all knew the words from the Hebrew at least to sing the songs
All the people
versus.
who were there knew the words. All the people who weren't there didn't know.
But at a Reformed temple, because of the choir
Yeah,
and because of how prevalent the
yeah.
choir is, and it's one of the things that drives me nuts, people like stop singing. It's almost sometimes like they give you a look like if you're singing because you're interrupting the choir. And I feel that the ritual is participating. I'm supposed to be
Right.
praying, not listen.
I would say that's less now. High holidays are different. I'm not to argue with you, but like sociologically, it's is fun. That's not as common in a Reformed synagogue, except maybe at the holy days. But in
the high holidays especially is it's the one thing that hits me because I think singing makes me feel part of.
But I will say, like a classical, if you were at the Great Synagogue in Vilna in 1890.
Let's be quick about
Yeah,
this,
sorry.
so we get back to it.
That was Orthodox. People weren't singing either. They were listening to the cantor. The cantor was praying on
And we
behalf
will
of you.
get to the participatory element of synchronization, how that is a powerful neurological.
Well, that's why I was saying I agree
tool
with
in
you with
itself,
that
just
participating really
moving
makes
at
it
the
happen.
same time, or just singing has been proven to show more empathy, more willingness to sacrifice for other people, exactly those pro-social behaviors we've spoken to. I don't want to get too bogged into the neurological aspect of it. I will refer to a couple things. And then if we need to inform the conversation more with technical terms like GABA receptors, amygdala, parts of our brains, we can add that in. But I'm going to try to avoid that for now. Right now, I want to explain one concept, and this is the vagus nerve, which the vagus nerve is the longest nerve we have in our body. It goes from our brain around our ears into our heart and stomach. But the important aspect of this vagus nerve is that it's bi-directional. Not only does our brain impact the nerve and then it responds to our organs, what we are eating is responding to our brain. So not only is the outside world impacting us, but our internal world is impacting this vagus nerve as well. The two main points of this vagus nerve is there is the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The parasympathetic is essentially when you engage this part of it, it calms you down. It opens you up to other people. It's that state of calm you feel when you're meditating and things like that. That is where your parasympathetic vagus nerve, your vagal tone has that parasympathetic nature. The other thing is the sympathetic nature of our, what's it called? The autonomic nervous system. And this is the fight or flight. This is something that scares you, makes your heart race, gets you all amped up, lots of energy. The exact opposite of parasympathetic, the calm versus the fight or flight response. And we're finding that with the sympathetic aspect, you are closed off to relationships. You are so focused on just survival that it is all about the individual, the I, and that's the priority. When the parasympathetic aspect, it is shown you're open up to relationships, you care about other people more, you're more willing to listen to what they have to say. So a big part of community is engaging this parasympathetic nervous system. And we know specifically this emotion, awe. is so fascinating. We talk about it being the days of awe right now, but it's such an interesting emotion because it's emotion correlated with joy and happiness, but joy and happiness often engage the sympathetic aspect of gives you lots of energy. It doesn't actually calm you down. It wants to run around and energizes you. But awe is one of those happy weighted emotions that calms you down simultaneously. So it's a really interesting thing. And when we talk about rituals, sometimes that goal is awe. And we see it in our Sidurim because awe recognizes our own humility. If we're defining awe, it's exposing you to something that questions your understanding of the world. It's something that's so grand that it's hard for our minds to process. And we have studies now that we can see if we have more awe in our life, if we have more sympathetic, vagal tone, then we have more positive emotions. We have better relationships with other people. And now, because of technology, we can study that and prove that. But our rituals have naturally engaged this on our own, calming behaviors, meditation. The sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system also gets engaged. It makes you recognize when moments are very important, like the shofar. When you hear the blast, it's going to engage your sympathetic nervous system. It's going to wind you up. We have this idea of it will awaken you. And so there are also religious, communal, positive impacts from engaging that, but more so we will focus on the parasympathetic part, the calming you down, the receptivity to other people. And some studies, they put some participants into an fMRI machine and had them do some prayer, chanting, ritual movements, basic choreographed things of rituals. And the regions in our brain tied to empathy lit up. Just the choreography of small ritual behaviors lit up in that fMRI machine. It gets more interesting as we try to engage the emotion of awe. There was a study where participants were asked to stand near a grove of towering eucalyptus trees for 1 minute versus a tall building. And then a researcher accidentally, an actor, drops a ton of pins next to them. The control subject, let's remember, the one that didn't have awe is who saw a building. The one who saw just a minute of eucalyptus trees were, what does the study say? They helped pick up significantly more pins than the group that did not have awe, right? So it shows that awe automatically leads to greater pro-social behavior, wanting to help other people. We can simplify that down. They showed some people, the non-control group saw space exploration, panoramic landscapes, Google Earth videos, and the others saw neutral clips that didn't induce awe. Awe viewers reported a stronger sense of connectedness, a diminished ego focus. They felt that their self was smaller. They were exposed to the vastness of the world. They felt smaller, and they showed increased belief in God or cosmic order. And so what that study shows is that awe quiets the ego and it expands your moral and spiritual perspective. The next thing, these studies go on. These are really interesting to me. So participants who received 8 weeks of mindfulness training, later in a waiting room, all the chairs were filled and someone on crutches came in. And the people who were exposed to mindfulness training, 50% of them gave up their chair to the person on crutches, where only 15% of them gave up the chair if they didn't have mindfulness training. And so this shows a long-term impact of when we engage these parts of our brain through ritual, that we're actually training our brains to be more empathetic through just the choreography of it. We are growing this muscle for empathy and kindness towards our community. Another one is that participants were asked to recall moments of moral elevation, a moment where people saw someone being brave or courageous to help someone out. And the ones that were able to remember this awe-like sensation of remembering someone doing good for another person felt more warmth, more uplifted and more likely to help others. And so it shows that this awe is not just engaged visually, it's engaged with thought, with memory. There are all these different instances of how awe can engage our world. And all of these different instances proven how awe creates more positive emotions in ourselves, but the main focus is creates more positive social behaviors toward communities. Right. So the theory around that is that it engages and creates the small self. It reduces that self focus. It orients us more towards the collective whole. And because of this scaffolding, awe activates that vagus nerve we were talking about. It lowers our heart rate, blood pressure, inducing more calm. And because of that response, we are more compassionate, generous, and cooperative. We can see this in Judaism in lots of different ways. I mean, just the story of Sinai with fire and trembling. We have yirah, which is the word for awe, and recognizing something so vast. It's written into our stories. Kol Nidre's communal stillness, that quiet, that fear in the room that you can feel, that is awe-inducing. It's built into the choreography of the ritual. Sukkot's fragile walls underneath the stars. These are strategic ways for us to feel awe built into our rituals, for us to not only have more positive emotions, but engage more positively with our community. And then with Ne'ilah, as we're standing up during the final hour, that commitment all together, that moral courage is awe-inducing. They say that awe is the number one thing against anti-narcissism because it diminishes the small self so much that if you can engage yourself with 1 minute of awe a day, you immediately become less entitled and more anti-narcissistic.
Humility. Humility is a potent drug.
Humility is definitely. And so the first big emotion of rituals, and we'll, I don't know how long, do we have till 11:30 or so?
I don't know, where you guys gotta be?
Yeah, 11:30.
We'll say like an hour. Okay, so we've got 20 minutes left. I want to make sure I can get through at least as much as we can. Awe is the first big emotion we want to look at and that we see in our rituals that have been shown to be great for communal cohesion. The next one is gratitude, which shows up so much in our rituals time and time again. And so participants in a study were asked to recall times when someone had helped them. And immediately in these brain scans, our prefrontal cortex lit up. And this is correlated so much with empathy. That's just the thought of thinking of gratitude immediately is stretching that muscle of empathy. And we can see it engaged in our fMRI machines and so much more. In a study, participants wrote about times they felt grateful versus neutral memories. And later they were asked to sort through data of surveys. The gratitude group spent twice as much time helping someone, giving free work to another person just because they engaged with gratitude previously than the neutral group that didn't engage with gratitude, that wrote about neutral memories. So we see that gratitude motivates costly generosity without the need for reward. Huge, just the idea of gratitude. The next thing is, once again, participants were primed with gratitude versus neutral states, and then they were offered the choice, a small immediate reward or a larger delayed reward. The gratitude group often chose the delayed reward much more than the neutral group. It shows gratitude builds moral patience, resilience, and more long-term orientation, less immediate self-gain, which is so important for being able to sacrifice for the community, to show up for another person. So why do we think gratitude is so impactful? What about gratitude? Does anybody have an instinct of why that could show up in our neural network in such a positive way and how it affects us so emotionally?
You feel like you've done something for someone and you feel like you did something good, so it makes you happy.
Yeah, or the reverse, that if you're constantly grateful, you're so other focused that you immediately are seeing the world not as an entitled thing, but that you are a recipient of something. So that's great. Anybody else have an idea? Yeah.
Well, I also think that it's really important to recognize that gratitude is like, can be a trained reaction, like you can start to seek out moments of gratitude as an individual if you want to fill your cup with that type of, you know, appreciation, you know, it's, if you look for it, it's there.
Yeah.
You know, it's the glass half full, glass half empty, and you can make a choice as to how you say these things.
And that
It is
speaks to the
beneficial.
muscle that in our minds,
training
if we start training our brains to look for gratitude and have these positive responses in ourselves,
And it
that
makes you
you're
feel-
actually, it's more
it makes you feel
accessible
like
to
You're
you.
wanted, you're meaningful to other people, you're not just another, you know, they're recognizing you. And it advances your esteem, self-esteem.
Yeah, it speaks on you being a part in a relationship, but also in that note, it speaks on dependency. That we can't create everything ourselves, that gratitude itself is showing that we cannot generate everything in our life. So not only is it relationship, but interdependence as well.
Wards off depression. If you're grateful, you're not as depressed.
I think there's lots of studies showing continuous
feels
gratitude really impacts how much positive emotion we have in our lives.
You mentioned Durkheim, and he made his name in the field by proving, according to sociological statistics, that Jews and Christians avoid suicide precisely because of their ritual connection to their own community, as opposed to Protestants, who ended up suffering the much larger rates of suicide because they don't have the ritualistic aspect in their religion to create something larger and beyond them.
So first study, I don't know, I think it was last year. Rabbi talked a lot about the ritual of prayer, and every time you eat something and you say something, it's all about gratitude. And that kind of changed my thinking, since my brother was Orthodox, and there was a time I would think, he doesn't even think about this stuff. It's all rote. But that's a rote mechanism for gratitude. And it's beautiful, and it really flipped how I thought about that part of traditional Jewish religion.
Yeah.
And you know, we were just talking about entitlement. Gratitude is the opposite of entitlement.
Right.
If you're grateful for something, if you're not feeling entitled to it, it means it came to you with grace. And that's an important way to look at life, because if you're entitled, why would you be grateful? If you deserved it.
And that's two big things. Neurologically, just to chime in with that neurological aspect, we have this thing called the default mode network in our brain, which is very much when that is engaged, it's I focused. It's more the autopilot. And they found that awe and gratitude significantly lessens the amount of time we spend in that default mode network. But we bring up some good points about how Jewish ritual engages gratitude in so many ways. And we can look at Jewish ritual as essentially a training ground for growing that muscle of gratitude that takes away from entitlement, that makes us more community focused. Before we wash our hands, there's a blessing for it. Modeh Ani is the first blessing we say in the morning. Gratitude is hyper focused in Judaism. I mean, with Hamotzi, Borei Puri Hagafen, all these different rituals are very gratitude focused. We can see the intuition of our Jewish ritual formulators. They knew about this, but we couldn't prove the neurological aspect of it until the next thing. So we have two emotions so far, awe and gratitude. The next big part of ritual that we found is synchrony. And that was something that got brought up earlier, the idea of singing in unison, how impactful that can be. And so there's been studies showing that even if we're waving our arm, there's no emotional encoding into the ritual at all. It's a total arbitrary
Wave
ritual.
at a baseball game.
Yeah, exactly. Things like that. It doesn't have to be religiously encoded or have that weight to it, but our hearts end up in sync with one another. Our nervous system, our brain chemistry becomes more synchronized with each other. And in that safety, people feel much more connected in community. So we take the religious aspect out of it completely. We still recognize how moving in sync with another person creates a significant higher level of interconnectedness. A study that is fascinating, this elementary school teacher split up two different teams, a green and a yellow team, and then split those teams in half. And of the half of each team, so the quarters, right? Not math oriented at all, but the quarters, one quarter was given rituals where they had to put a bead to their forehead or clap at a certain pace before they made their friendship bracelets or whatever it was. And the other just was charged with creating friendship bracelets. So of course, everybody on the green team favored other green team members, that there was already the interconnectedness just because they were also the same color. But it was significantly greater with arbitrary rituals of the clapping, the bead putting to the forehead, whatever it was, of feeling like they could commit more time, friendship, empathy to those other people just because they were charged with this silly ritual of maybe it was like it's hard to get exactly what the ritual was through the writing of the book, but essentially something silly, just another step in the process. And so another study was groups of strangers were instructed to march or sing synchronously, and others were instructed to sing out of sync. Synchrony group cooperated significantly more with each other once they were given step-by-steps, even if it was at a personal cost, even if they received less of a reward, even if it came with a time cost, because they marched together, because of their brain chemistry becoming more in sync, they were more willing to sit with the group. And yes, like I said, there's the brain waves, breathing, our heart rates, they line up with one another when we just start moving in sync. And that brings up an interesting question of why our body does that. And that's harder to know why that's been an adapted thing, why our biological systems have adapted that way. But what we know for sure is that it happens and that it creates people to feel more safe, more willing to open up to one another. Doing on time.
Clayton, I think dancing, when you're dancing with a partner, not just,
Yeah.
rock dancing, gives you that kind of feeling, being in sync with another person.
I think dancing is a great example, and that's such a ritual.
And maybe that's why they thought this
To really make
was
the
so,
point, they have
was so
gatherings where everyone's listening to their own music.
Okay.
Mhm.
And you can't even hear other people's music. And everyone's just
But as long
dancing
as
and it
people are
still works.
moving, yeah, I'm sure it does. And so this synchrony is this pre-verbal trust of like people willing to trust one another without having to verbally express it. There's that embodied attunement. There's also this element of humility, once again, that when you're reading a passage together, not one person can move faster than the other person. We all have to move at the same pace, or you mess up the entire system. So within that containment and humility has this great emotional response of recognizing you are not the focus of the room, but the collective group is. And so we see this all the time in Jewish rituals with shucking, bowing back and forth, standing, sitting cues, circling with the lulav, chanting Hoshanot, just singing together.
Clayton,
all of
you
those
say you
things.
don't know why. There's a good evolutionary reason why. Because if you're attached to a tribe, which is the way you survived in all
Yeah, but
human
that's the
history,
result. We don't know why the moving in synchrony.
because people who moved in sync were more tribal and survived the lions and the savages more.
And that's the way the people in the army, when you go.
I think the question is being, the response is the adaptive, clear result, but we don't know why moving in sync became that adaptive response.
Because people who moved in sync were more likely to move on to the next generation.
Yeah, because the ones who survived were the ones who.
I'm asking us to go before that, of not the survival instinct of moving in packs, of why moving synchronously.
Natural selection.
Natural selection.
Anyway.
Okay, and so the next thing that we'll bring up before ending and taking some questions of memory, repetition, and commitment. Rituals have a sort of sunk cost value to it that neuroscientists have found that if you commit time to something, you are more likely to follow through with it. There's the aspect of if I spend money on something, I'm more likely to get the effect out of it, to commit to buy into it. But there's also the public element that if I'm doing this sunk cost ritual in front of other people, I'm making a stance saying I will do something, it is clearly going to be more impactful. And Judaism is so big on public rituals, time investments, things like that. And the memory aspect, it's not just our memory, but there's a ritual memory in itself, that all of our rituals are connected to thousands of years of tradition. So it's not only our ritual memory we're connected to, we're generations, like door by door before, and because of that ritual memory, it has that much more of an encoded neurological, emotional response in each of us. 11:22. Does anybody have any questions before kind of start wrapping up?
So when you talk about the Jewish aspect of it, I think there's a distinct difference between traditional communities and us reform and more, modernistic, whatever, communities. We keep changing our rituals to some level, for example, with music. So we change up the music to make it more interesting. And then people say, well, traditionally we sang it this melody for Don Alon or whatever. So we're intentionally breaking the ritual in Reform Judaism. Do you think that's a bad thing based upon your research?
I think it's a great thing. I think with that ritual boredom we brought up, of rituals not being resonant, that we have to break and change rituals to fit our historical context, and that it's been proven that that's happened for the last 2,000
Depends how
years.
often you change, it depends how
But
often you
there's
change
definitely
the
a-
music
like,
because.
We're assuming, quote, traditional people don't change rituals too. They just don't have the language of change, but they do change, right?
Well, no, but it depends
So-
on how much you change music, like if you change it all the time, it's like kind of.
Right,
But that-
change is assumed, but each religious ideology towards change depends on how much freedom there is. But I don't think there's a single religious movement that does not have ritual change. I think you're bringing up a good point of where is the balance. Does the reform movement have the perfect balance of freedom to make changes? And I would argue that if a ritual is resonant and we can find ways to polish them through the mechanics we're uncovering of neurology and emotion science, then of course we should make more resonant rituals that make people more communal oriented in a world that is filled with fragmentation.
They say at an army base during a war, if you have a certain religion that you adhere to, that when you survive more healthy because when they say a prayer or sing a song that you're all familiar, it brings you together. If they change it too much,
Exactly.
they're not gonna be, they can't change it.
You
too
lose
much.
the synchrony aspect if you totally add new things in, and the ritual memory has less impact if you totally take it out from the tradition as well. You want that long time, and ritual feels more authentic if it feels connected to the past, is what they're finding. So if you're totally reinventing ritual without connecting it to the past or the pillars of the tradition, you're losing that ritual memory encoding that's so important for it to be impactful. Yeah.
It sounds as though the conversation about ritual is like threading a tightrope of, avoiding boredom, yet also not facing the challenge of change, because change is also very difficult for people to, internalize. So if there's too much change, all of a sudden you throw off the ritual. But then if there's, the same thing every single day, you lose the impact of the ritual because you get bored.
Right, and it's about prioritizing too. If the ritual memory is so important to us that we're not willing to make a change, then we're gonna stay in boredom, the ritual boredom. But if we totally lose that, if we prioritize the neurological things, then we lose that spiritual memory that I'm speaking to of connected to the tradition. I want us just to get to this quote at C. Would someone read that for us really quickly before we start wrapping it up? C.
It is important to realize that authenticity in religious traditions is a feeling, not a fact.
And so what do we take away from that? I think that's exactly what you're speaking to about the balance of needing to be connected tradition, but that we also need to recognize that these are human-made things. And so it's about engaging and making the ritual an impactful feeling, but also recognizing that this is not divinely given. Anything else to unpack from that quote before we?
Who's the person that decides?
Who's the person?
What did you say?
That's the person.
In the modern world, each person decides on their own.
That's,
Right,
but then you
well,
have a
In
tendency.
a
to
world filled
lose-
with autonomy.
Then you lose.
And
Yeah.
Judaism has been living from the
Right.
majority choice, and so it's about introducing new rituals. It's using this to inform us, introducing new rituals, changing the ones we have, and if it's picked up and neurologically, communally effective, then we keep them, and if not,
Experimentation.
we let them go. That's how rituals have been created from the beginning. If it's successful,
Yeah.
you keep it. If you don't, you let it go. And if it's bought in by the majority, it becomes tradition, not because it was given by Sinai, but because of that majority acceptance.
Do we make the changes in the rituals to interest the younger generation to make sure?
I think
that
that's
they
exactly the conversation
participate
right
like
now.
it?
Is
That's why we make
reform
the change.
communities are struggling so much to get young engagement. There is that ritual boredom. That statistic of spiritual but not religious is totally hitting our Jewish communities. If we don't adapt our rituals to be impactful to the next generation of people, the ritual boredom will grow, the disaffiliation will grow. Judaism will have more fragmentation to it. And so there's a real fear and urgency just within our own small religious sect itself.
But every generation though is thought,
Yeah.
every generation of Jews thought that the young Jews are not gonna be Jews anymore.
Yeah, this
And so-
isn't to
and
say
so
we need to
we shouldn't be we're so
They
special.
don't know how to work.
I think this is a bigger,
But this is a question that we continuously need to ask.
Your parents said it too.
We have literally.
All right, let's pull it together just for 2 more minutes and then we'll.
Like Clayton,
We've got one question here.
I think what was interesting for me was when you started and asked what words do you associate with ritual, kind of everything that we gave was pretty positive. And actually, I think that, you shared it afterwards, but there is a lot of negative stigma surrounding just the notion of ritual.
Yeah.
You talk about Nazi Germany or, a lot of the belief of what fundamentalism is, or, you talk about cults right before the
Yeah.
session even started. I think while, there are certainly in the kind of modern world, like these negative perceptions of what ritual leads to, I don't think there is that same negative perception around ideas of community and belonging. And I think what you're presenting is that you don't get community and belonging without ritual.
You don't, or it's an amazing advanced technology to help with community and belonging. And it brings up such a good question of what is the metric of a successful religion, or if the religion is upholding power structures and not helping society become more communal, to have positive benefits on society in general, it is not succeeding. But if we focus on community, belonging, encoding our rituals with that aspect, with that goal, then yes, it is positive for society. But there is that polemic there of rituals can be amazing tools for greatness, but they can also be awful tools for heinous, horrendous acts in the world.
Same as religion, science, technology, and everything else can be used for good or evil. It's a matter of.
when
how
you
you-
keep pushing on someone's got it. I think that's the whole thing with people who try to push you into their religion versus your religion. All you
Yeah.
can't push someone to do those rituals. They have to feel that it's part of them and they want to do it.
Yeah, and I think
But
that's
don't
where
we all
that
do that to our kids? Don't we push them
parasympathetic
into-
nervous response, that openness. If something is making you more closed and sure of where you are instead of making you open and question the world around you, then that religion or that teaching is not making you more communally oriented whatsoever. Yeah.
That's
take
why I
one.
think Jewish camp works so well, because it's the rituals, the shared experiences, and the spirituality without
Yeah.
being religious.
And it's repeated. It's for a long term. They have
Right.
this
Why-
investment.
Why not say
It
that's
has
religion?
awe. It has
It's
gratitude.
religious, but it's not overly sitting in services.
plain.
It's,
But
of course it's religion.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course it's religion.
No, I'm just pushing, I'm
But
just
that's-
pushing you, but
It's
like,
like the fun
but-
part of the religion.
why isn't sitting in service is fun also, but that, yeah.
No, you know what I mean, it appeals to
Yeah.
kids and it keeps them, yeah.
Yeah, well, that just shows how developed of a ritual. I mean, camp can be seen as this super developed ritual that engages awe, gratitude, synchrony, repetition, the public expression that we just looked at,
We had a
all
camp
mixed
director right now.
together and shows how impactful it
And
can
it
be
all
on
goes
kids
to what the
growing up.
rabbi said yesterday. You have to first commit yourself to going to this institution that gives you this.
Yeah, so much of it is
knowledge and-
just showing up
it.
in the
Yeah,
choreography to
and being
engage
together.
this neurological, biological response. And
Yeah.
it's even just an unconscious thing that happens. And so I hope we can take this learning and not only feel free to look at our rituals, criticize them, to change them, to be more impactful, but also, where am I going with that? Yeah, that's about the gist of it. Yeah, Barbara, I'll give you the last word.
I mean, like both my kids made Aliyah, right? And so they don't belong to a synagogue, they don't do a lot of the things. It's, we don't need to because we live in Israel, right? So how would we unpack the ritual of living in Israel as satisfying these same things, or doesn't it?
That's his next thesis.
It says,
Right? That's the
That's his next, yeah, that's beyond the scope. But, and just to look at this as this, there's this amazing scaffolding from ritual action into how we
It's
show up in the world, and through that emotional
You seem to be
scaffolding.
imposing an
Into
arbitrary
the
limit on what a
amazing
valid
tools
community
to
is.
help our community.
Logically speaking, there's nothing wrong with going from synagogue to country.
I know, but.
Unless you
that's
impose
what
some
we-
arbitrary limit on the number of pieces.
How it does the same
And
things.
Israel,
It does.
Israel as a
Right.
society has
Holidays.
tons of public rituals
Right.
that are
That's
quote
what
not
I'm
religious,
trying
but
to
of course they're religious, like, you know,
Society has tons of rituals.
right. America has tons of public rituals too, less than we used to, but or less, so fewer that we agree on.
Fewer that we agree on.
Yeah, so thank you, Clayton.
Maybe another time we can get into Sukkot. Sukkot is essentially the case study for applying all of these teachings and how Sukkot shows that. But that's beyond the scope of our time right now. So maybe we'll revisit
Hey,
it.
when are you doing your thing? When are you presenting it?
It's pretty much finished, but it has to be submitted by March. So I've still got some time.
And then come May, right? I think is when ordination is. Yeah, put it on my calendar. Come May, we will have a new rabbi in the world, along with his classmate.
More than one.
Yeah, yes, of course, they also, and so, but before we go, we'll do a couple more rituals.
Can I make a
But-
plug?
Oh,
Make one?
sorry,
Clayton.
oh.
It's a Clayton plug, but if any of you have young adults in your household that are gonna be around for Yom Kippur, Clayton is leading a discussion in the afternoon of Yom Kippur during our study and reflection time for young adults like 20s and 30s.
And there will also be a healing
service.
service afterwards, that's meditative and focused on healing for the year to come.
Right.
So-
And everybody's invited to that, and I would love to see you all there.
Yeah, so on Yom Kippur is our last time with Clayton this year. Hopefully, maybe he could come visit, but thank you very much for the learning.
All right, bye, Pete and Papa, love you all.
That was great, Clayton.
Robert.